Hello and welcome to the LinkedIn Live with Veeam. I'm David Hill, and we're going to talk around some topics around Veeam's multi-cloud strategy and also Veeam's data portability and how this can help deliver capabilities for businesses, but also just a quick chat with what's going on in the world. So I'm David Hill. I'm a global technologist in the Veeam Product Strategy Group. I focus on cloud native products like Kubernetes, AWS, and Microsoft Azure public cloud. And I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Dave Russell. Dave?
Hey, David, how you doing this morning?
Absolutely awesome.
So we have the luxury, both of us, being in product strategy, looking at what the industry is doing, looking at what some of Veeam's now, 375 going on 380,000 customers globally do. And as you mentioned, data portability and cloud mobility really intertwined. Take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic and something that I find very interesting working in this kind of cloud data world that we now live in. And what I'm finding is with a lot of customers, and they're they're not stuck in this one cloud world, whether it's just a private cloud on-prem or say just AWS. It's truly becoming this multi-cloud world where some workloads are running on-prem, some workloads are running out in the public cloud in AWS and Microsoft Azure, and how we can help customers move between those by not only protecting their data in these different platforms, but actually giving them the capabilities to move those workloads around between these platforms. And I think when you think about the data portability aspects of that's critical in this world that we're seeing now, and how you manage that, manipulate it, and also how you protect yourself from corruption when you are moving this data around. What are you seeing, Dave?
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think what we're experiencing right now, and suddenly a huge portion of populations working from home, working remotely, and they may not have been before. You
Yeah.
literally cannot go into a data center, or you may be trying to lift and shift workloads very rapidly from on-prem to some other publicly hosted facility. Or in some cases, you may be already in a public cloud, but you're getting throttled because of demand, and you've got to look for basically safe haven, right? This is putting more and more pressure on data portability, data mobility, and cloud mobility in particular. But that notion of not having data be stranded and being able to make it more fluid and movable at points in time, I think we're never going to go back to a period of a few months ago where we weren't in this kind of situation. We weren't thinking like we are today. I think this is the new normal when we think about having the need to unleash our data and to make sure we can move it around at will.
Yeah, and you make a good point about like when you think about the data portability when you're running in a public cloud. There's been stories around issues with throttling in public clouds because they're running out of actual resources, physical resources in the data center.
Yeah.
So if you have mission critical applications that are dependent upon specific resources, how can you then be able to just sit there and say, okay, well, I just have to bear with this? If you think back to even just like simple things like when Apple was throttling the performance on your iPhone because of your battery power, everybody noticed it. So when your business is relying upon this performance and then it gets throttled, you're really going to notice that. So being able to move between these different platforms and say, right, I've got free resources back on vSphere in my data center on-prem. I'm just going to do something like an instant VM recovery and spin those resources and workloads up real quickly back on-prem
Yes.
is, for me, a big game changer in today's world. As you say, people aren't able to get in the data centers anymore to go and resolve things anyway.
Yeah, and I think really everyone would choose flexibility, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Veeam is software defined. We have a very flexible, open implementation that we can accommodate. Our data formats open and very flexible. We'll get to that in a moment. But I think just the ability to have choice, to move from Azure to AWS or AWS to Azure or to private cloud or on-prem to off, and maybe even some situations repatriate data back if it's appropriate. No one would deselect having choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say about that as well. When you think about the whole just backup piece, and we're thinking about how we can just move these around. The interesting thing that I found when I joined Veeam was lots of customers still live in this physical world. After spending 8 years at VMware, where they would have you believe the whole world is virtualized, which obviously with 98% market share, why wouldn't they have that belief? But when I came to Veeam and started speaking to a lot of these large customers, the physical world is still a reality for them, and it's a big challenge. And even just some cases of customers have migrated things like big databases to the public cloud, and then they've been constrained and it's been massive cost involved. They've gone and actually migrated back to on-prem and gone straight back to the physical as well, which for a lot of people think, well, why would you do that? But there's still a specific use case on these performance figures around bare metal as well, which I still find quite interesting and certainly from a data portability perspective.
Yeah, and that's probably a good time to mention, for people out there, feel free to join in on the conversation. Type your
Yeah,
questions in. Curious to see what you're seeing, or if you have any other specifics to ask. But one of the things that, David, I wanted to touch on is Veeam has always had this portable data format, meaning we write our data or in a self-describing manner, but it's an encapsulated package that can move across clouds, across systems, and it's so self-describing. In fact, you don't even actually have to have Veeam to be able to read the data. And one of the things that I like is speaking about how portable the data is. I have a number of these cute little SanDisk 2 terabyte SSD drives, plugs in via USB-C. But I do my work laptop backup on here with the Veeam Windows agent. And we have an extract utility that we can put on there such that I can hand this drive over to you, and that either Windows or Linux based extract utility, think of it like a PDF reader. It can go and look at all of my Veeam backups. So if the worst case scenario were to happen, say ransomware were to hit or some other natural disaster were to take out your data center, you can still get your data. And I think this plays part and parcel into our cloud mobility, data portability notion as well, that you don't want to get locked out of your data.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, and I love the SanDisk. I was actually hoping you were going to get some tapes out as well, since I was still a big fan of tape. But for me, what I find very interesting in all of this is you show that SanDisk, but also from the cloud perspective, the way that Veeam works is we can store all those backups in object storage, in S3, in Azure Blob Storage, and then that integrates with Veeam Backup and Replication. So we can actually manage those backups, copy them around. Maybe customers have invested heavily in secondary storage that they want on-prem, and they want their cloud backups to follow that best practice of the 3-2-1 rule, where you've got 3 copies of your data across 2 media types with one at least off-site. And with that portable data format, you can just copy that backup data across all different storage types, different object storage repositories, leverage scale-out backup repository to store it in different locations. And it's so powerful that it really is, for me, a big game changer in this multi-cloud world that we live in.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if we didn't remind people, one of the interesting things about Veeam is every single product that we have has a no charge, meaning free version associated with it. So you can just download a copy of Veeam and start working with it today, and it's perpetually no charge for a number of instances. So you can try this for yourself. But the thing, David, I think is interesting about what you were just describing is the issue sometimes people have is, what if they were to get compromised on-prem, say ransomware? One of the interesting things about having a portable data format and Veeam is you could, if your entire data center is compromised or at risk, you're unsure if it's clean or not, You can go download a fresh copy of Veeam, even the community edition, the no charge edition I was referencing, point it at your S3 bucket. Maybe it's AWS, maybe it's Azure. As long as you know the credentials in there, you can import that object storage bucket and start using your data. You don't have to bring it back to the data center. In fact,
Yeah.
you can do it from your laptop even. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, and that's a real great point you touch on there is with these external repository capabilities, you can literally take any backup that of in any public cloud and go do like direct restores, anything like that, manage it and apply your policies around that. And you'll also see like as we go forward, more and more integration with all our cloud products, how they all come together. Veeam believe very strongly in this single pane of glass. As an ex-admin, I used to do a lot of third line support back in my earlier days. And there was nothing worse than having to do console hopping. You know, back in my day, we used to have these massive CRT screens on my desk, and you couldn't actually get your keyboards on there because the screens were so big. But console hopping is a massive reality for people, having to go from, say, like a product that supports supports AWS, then supports Azure, then supports vSphere, then supports Nutanix, hopping across all these to do different tasks. Whereas what Veeam's goal is to build that true single pane of glass where you just open the one console and protect them. And I think that is really helping administrators just manage these complex environments that we're getting now with all the different types.
So yeah, that's a great point. We had someone ask a couple of interesting questions actually. Now, part of this has to do with scope, meaning granularity. And one of the things I think is powerful about the platform we're discussing is that can be at a file level, an entire machine, whether that's a physical machine, a virtual machine, or at an object level, meaning if you just want to get out a contact of O365, literally you just need someone's name, all the way to, no, I need to bring back all of SQL Server and it's running physically on a Windows box. That's something I think is very important. It's that scale. But maybe talk through, John had a question about security or security protocols that are in place with data portability. A couple things come to my mind, but curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, so security around the data portability is very important. When you think about how we actually store the data, for start, it's stored certainly in the public cloud on the S3 repositories. You can encrypt all that data with passwords, so it's all encrypted, and you can't actually then have someone, if, as we've seen before, people set their public settings on object storage buckets to be public. When it's encrypted, then people aren't able to go in and actually consume that data because it is all encrypted. And you also find when we're copying it back and forth, everything through the copies is done over an SSL tunnel. So everything's encrypted when it's moving between, like if we were, say, copying it from an on-prem data center out to S3, for example, everything's done through an SSL tunnel. So it's all encrypted and protected that way as well. And Dave, you said you had some thoughts on it?
Yeah, those are fantastic points. And, I think one of the more recent features that we came out with in version 10 just a few months ago was utilizing or leveraging S3 object lock. And so today that's with AWS, but also
Immutability.
a mutability feature. But we also can support that through Cloudian as well as other partners that we've got that have on-prem object storage capabilities as well. So one of the things that allows us to do or to offer customers then is literally even an AWS engineer couldn't go in and remove a bucket or data before the time had expired that you had put on place on there. It's essentially a timestamp driven, but very heavily policy enforced mechanism. And Microsoft is looking at something similar for Azure in the near future as well. So it goes back to really, we're in probably forever now a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world. And there's just no way to understand from day one, meaning right now, all of the future requirements you're going to have. So we really didn't know a few months ago this is the kind of world we're going to live in, that we would be working remotely, maybe not be able to get in the data center, maybe pushing forward into a multi-cloud world more rapidly. The other aspect of this I was thinking of, David, is migration. And our colleague Jason likes to say, migration is the disaster that you plan for because it's that
Yeah.
invasive potentially. But it goes back to having data not be stranded, that portability of data. While we're here, let's pop on a couple other questions here. Is it possible to restore my VM on Cloud Direct?
Yeah, so I guess what you mean by on Cloud Direct is you can, if you have a vSphere VM running or a Hyper-V VM, you can actually do a direct restore of that virtual machine out to AWS EC2 or to Microsoft Azure. And we actually do the conversion as we're uploading that data to the public cloud. So that from a migration perspective, which was a real good segue into this question, when you think about you running all your different workloads on different platforms, any supported platform on the Veeam side, so vSphere, Nutanix, Hyper-V, physical Windows and Linux, AWS, Microsoft Azure, you can back up any of those workloads and go and restore them to any one of those platforms. And it's as simple as just going to the backup file, right clicking and saying, do a direct restore to EC2 or a direct restore to Microsoft Azure. And we can just literally restore that data, copy the data to the public cloud, to the platform that we need it to run on. And then we just, through some APIs, we do a conversion and it all runs. It's real simple and real easy to do. And it's one of my favorite capabilities, being a cloud guy, being able to actually migrate my workloads from on-prem out to the public cloud by just doing a simple right click. It's so simple. I love it.
Yeah, I think of it as a translate on the fly. To your point, Veeam is doing the conversion necessary, but in real
Yeah.
time. And that kind of really answers another question that came in, saying in this current lockdown situation, customer changing the repository from being on-prem to the cloud. Hopefully in the near future, we're able to return to somewhat normal operations. So may want to bring that data back. And I
Yeah.
think that bi-directional nature is very, very interesting to keep in mind. We're obviously moving more and more towards the cloud as an industry. But to your point of, physical didn't go away, tape didn't go away,
Yeah.
on-prem gear is not going to go away in its entirety. We're going to live in an increasingly multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world. Talk a little bit about if you had to move off-prem today and you had to sort of cloud burst to continue services. One of the things that we're describing here is you can very easily bring back, if you so wanted to in the future, your data on-prem.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is when you think about this, like certainly today, when we're talking about leveraging the cloud to help us through this particular situation that the world's in, and we mentioned how people can't get into data centers. Maybe they're running out of storage. Maybe they had a project where they were going to be adding more storage into their secondary storage arrays for their backup. And now all of a sudden they can't get there. Well, with Veeam and the scale out backup repository, it's real easy just to add in things like object storage buckets and repositories to expand that capacity of that storage platform. So if you think you've got a load of data that's been backed up on-prem, you can set policies to actually move that data and copy that data out to these public clouds. And you mentioned earlier about immutability. The great thing about that and the scale out backup repository is that you can put them locks on so that you know that when these objects and these backups are moved to the public cloud, they're locked and they're secure. And then when hopefully this ends in the next few months, we can get back into our offices and into our data centers, we can upgrade our storage systems and then very easily bring that data back to our local storage or our secondary storage platforms that we've been building out. And it is real simple to do. It's all just policy driven. You just put some tick boxes in and just say, I want my data to move on this period. I want my data to copy, and how long do I want to keep it for? And you can specify all your retention settings and those kind of things. And it's just as simple as going in, right clicking, editing the properties of your scale out backup repository, and just changing those settings.
And I think a critical thing to mention there, and I love everything you said, by the way, and it is powerful, and it truly is as easy as David described it. But there could be a concern of, well, what happens then if I lose metadata? If you migrate data out to the cloud, am I at risk? And no, because of our data format being self-describing, that's part of the reason it is so portable. So if the worst case were to happen, meaning you lose your infrastructure on-prem, this isn't a case of where indexes and metadata that would be required to retrieve that data in the cloud or object storage are at risk. We can rehydrate and rebuild that information on the fly. Well, let's see if there's a couple
Yeah,
other questions that come in as well.
yeah. So I was going to touch on what you just said there. When you think about the traditional way of doing backups, and I always like to go back in time and talk about the old zip drives, for example. Everybody loved them. Everyone had a zip drive, the nice little blue thing. We used to have them on our
Yeah,
desks. But the problem is, if you took a backup on a zip drive back in the early 2000s or whenever it was, and you actually want to get hold of that data now, it's pretty impossible to get hold of a zip drive. You may find one on eBay, but they're very difficult, and there's no guarantee that that media disk that you've kept up in your attic in 200 degrees of heat or whatever it gets up there is going to work. But I tend to think of Veeam more as like WinZip back in the day, where you created these zip files, and even today, whether you're on Mac, Windows, Linux, you can still open those zip files and extract that data. So if you find some old zip files, which we all do now and then from our old early days of IT, we open them up and we're amazed at what we can find. But it's so simple to open them up. And that's how I perceive Veeam. We're not tied to any hardware. We're just software driven, and
right.
we can just always able to open those backup files with that extract utility you mentioned earlier. It's phenomenal. And you mentioned some questions coming in, and there's a good one here about how are you able to limit the bandwidth while backing up to the cloud. So you can go into Veeam backup and replication and set specific limits on how much data throughput you want. You can manage and control that, as well as defining when the data moves and how long you want to keep it for. So that's a great question as well. And we've got a good one about immutable protection using Veeam Cloud Connect using local repos. So this is a question from Wayne. So Dave mentioned some of the on-prem object storage platforms that we're working with right now to be able to offer immutability on-prem. So with Veeam backup and replication, you'll be able to use those with a scale-out backup repository and be able to use the immutability capability on them as well.
Yeah, and today that includes Cloudian, Wasabi, and Zadera, I believe, is coming in the very, very near future, and will qualify more over time as well.
Yeah, and I think when we're looking at all these, the thing with the cloud is if you look at the way that iterations are released and how it scales, and AWS is a great example. You log into AWS today, there's obviously a massive amount of services, but then every other week there's a new service or capability being released. So from Veeam's perspective, everything changes quite regularly now. It's not like the old days where vSphere 4 came out and then you'd wait a year for update 1, you'd wait another year for update 2. Things change so quickly now. So as time goes by, you're going to see more and more capabilities, more and more support for extra platforms out in not only the public cloud, but also the on-prem capabilities that are coming out. And we also see it with Veeam's product. When we look at Veeam Backup for AWS, we iterate and release capabilities and features into that product every 3 to 4 months. So we're always keeping up with the changes that we're seeing on the platforms that we're actually supporting.
Yeah, and
It's quite phenomenal, really, the speed of change now.
yeah, that is the new normal, as are expanded choices, and I think it just goes back to this is why data portability and cloud mobility are going to be increasingly hardwired requirements that everyone needs to consider, because you just don't know when and where, or perhaps even why you're going to have to make a shift, but you need a platform that's extensible and flexible enough to do that, and something that's software defined and writes in a self-describing way becomes the answer or the antidote to try to get through that kind of a challenge of being locked in.
Yeah, the vendor lock-in piece is massive for me, and I think this we've talked about it quite a bit, but that whole data portability piece is critical for me when you're looking at all these different platforms and making sure that you're not locked into any single platform, but also, to be honest, you're not locked into Veeam, and making sure that we can escape from, as a customer, if we want to get out of that platform or get off a particular product, is critical in these days now, that with all this change and iteration. So
Yeah, I think just hit one more item. I'm remiss not to mention Exagrid as well, which has a mutable protection integration with Veeam as well as Exagrid has the Veeam data mover native on its platform that improves the overall synthetic processing performance really significantly. So that's one of the things about a software-defined open platform is that you can cultivate an ecosystem of partners, leverage gear that you've already got today, or have choice going forward in the future. And so, really, so many of these things remind me of analogs of themselves. Software-defined aspect of Veeam, the scale-up backup repository you mentioned to virtualize our backup repositories underneath, a portable data format to move across cloud or on-prem and off-prem, and then having an ecosystem of infrastructure providers of your choice, really, to be able to consume a best-of-breed experience.
yeah, exactly, and that it's that choice, I think, that we're all starting to grow up with now, and the older days you would pretty much just pick a vendor and stick with them for life, and I think when if you just compare it to smartphones, the choices you have now, that has fundamentally changed the way that we think about IT and everything that we do. The fact that on a phone we just go on the app store and just pull down apps when we need them. We see that in IT now, just with software. Everything's software as a service. We want to just be able to to pick and choose as we go forward. And that has moved into that hardware space as well. You may buy a particular type of storage today, and then in 2 years, you may change your mind and move to a different platform. And having that portability across those is critical to the way that we all live our lives now in this lockdown, interchangeable world that we all seem to be living in now. It's
Yeah,
it's quite
absolutely.
extraordinary, the change over, I would say, just the past 5 years, the way that everything works.
Totally agree. Well, as always,
It's
great
pretty
to chat with
crazy.
you, David. Have a great
Yeah, you
weekend,
too.
everyone. And if you have more
Yeah,
questions,
and
please feel free to type them in there and we'll get back to you.
and go to veeam.com for any more information that you want. Ask questions, get in touch, go watch some demos, anything like that. It's all on veeam.com. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.